So we are now recording the OWASP Houston chapter August 2024 meeting. Our guest speaker today is Mark Adams. And Mark, I'm turning it over to you. And go ahead and start your presentation, please, sir.
All right, thank you very much. First of all, can everyone hear me okay?
Loud and clear on my end.
Awesome, perfect. Yeah, I use the headset sometimes for internal meetings if I don't want other people in my household to be disturbed, but this is not the case here, so decided to go headset free. All right, good deal. So yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to do this. Yeah, my name is Mark Adams, and I'm currently a director of security and compliance for a company that's actually based in Ohio. And I've been doing this sort of work, cybersecurity and that sort of thing, for probably the last, I don't know, 25, 30 years. And so I've seen how all of this has, how technology has progressed throughout that time, especially on the web, the web-based stuff, the virtual stuff, the cloud stuff, and so on. And with that, of course, comes new risks and vulnerabilities, and ways to bypass controls and bypass security. And as things get more complex, it seems like that's the case. Quickly, also my background. I am a former IT auditor for a couple of the big four accounting firms out there. So I've been on both sides of the table. I've performed audits for clients. I've performed assessments, compliance assessments, and I've also been on the other side where I'm actually being audited. In fact, I'm in that place right now where I'm the one being audited. I'm the auditee. So I've seen it both ways. And what we're going to talk about here is something that I have noticed for a while now is this checkbox compliance mentality. And going back, maybe back in the 90s. Back in the 90s, we didn't really have, there was no PCI DSS. There was really no, even web stuff was new and new-ish with Microsoft IIS and things like that, Apache. The, penetration tests were not required. Assessments weren't required, but companies started doing them just because, it was a good idea. But there were really very few, if any, like legal mandates to do it. And so now, fast forward to 2024, over that time we have lots of laws and regulations and so on where it is required to do it. And on the one hand, it's a good thing because it's forcing companies to spend money to do these things that they should be doing anyway. However, the downside is that they're only going to do what they have to do. And so they view protection, data protection, through this lens of liability and what they're on the hook for, what could happen to us, what do they do the math in terms of the fines and penalties, potential fines and penalties, if they don't do it, and so they try to get away with the absolute minimum, and in order to minimize costs, and that's something we've seen for a long time. It used to be that testing, like software testing, would be almost non-existent or just very little in order to push that new version out, and then it would be buggy and they would have to fix it because all the pressure was on production, finishing that project or getting that application out there. And nothing's really changed. Only now it's, we now have the security compliance. We have to check these boxes so that we can demonstrate that, yes, we've done our due diligence, so that if something goes sideways, we can point to our checklist and say, hey, we did this. What else do you want us to do? And what happens is things always fall to the cracks. I have a, just kind of level set what we're doing here. I mean, audit scopes, the audit universe is extremely broad. We can do all sorts of, you can audit anything. And what I decided to do here is, we're simply going to narrow this down to strictly, software development. That's all we're going to look at. Any implications of vulnerabilities within that space. We're not going to look at other things, just to keep it simple, because we could be here forever. So I want to do a case study. Some of you may be aware of this and may have read about this, but back in April, Dell had to come out and announce that they suffered a breach of 49 million customer records. And what's interesting is how it happened. It was a partner portal that they use for their customers. And I think we're all familiar with being a partner with a major vendor like Dell, and they always have a portal that these customers can log into for various things. Well, the hackers were able to breach this partner portal using an API by abusing an API. And what they did was kind of clever. They registered multiple accounts under fake company names, and they were able to get access within a couple of days without verification, meaning that no one on the Dell end was like verifying that these companies were real and legitimate. And so once they were in, they started generating 7-digit service tags and submitting them into the portal page and scraping any information that they could get back. And what's crazy is that the portal did not have any rate limiting, which allowed them to generate about 5,000 requests per minute for 3 weeks without Dell even knowing what was going on or blocking the attempts. And so this is just, this is just oversight here. The risk, if you're wondering, is social engineering attacks impersonating Dell. Now, this information about the hack came from the hacker themselves. They provided this information to the journalists saying, hey, here's how we did it. And looking at this, I don't know anybody at Dell. I didn't talk to anybody at Dell, but having been through these things on my own, I'm pretty sure I know what happened. My speculation would be that Dell internally, it's not that they don't have good security people. It's that a couple of things. Number one, they either don't have a very robust, software project management or change management process, or if they do, they really weren't following it. And they were probably looking at this portal thinking that there's no risk. What I used to hear a lot, and I still do, is, well, and what could somebody really do? Who cares if a hacker gets into this, right? I hear that a lot. And, having seen pretty much everything, I usually have an answer for that. Well, okay, so why don't you just open it up to the internet? Oh, well, no, we don't want to do that. Well, why not? So, but that's a common response or a common attitude that is out there, which is they think that a particular portal or web application or site is it's just benign. There's no PII out there. There's no PHI. There's no CHI. There's no credit card information. It's just a customer portal. So what could somebody really do? And they more than likely, that was their thought process, was it was a low risk, no big deal. And of course, they got burned. And so we'll talk about this as we go on about just thought processes and having a proper approach to things like this. So what would have resolved this, or what would have prevented this? Well, I kind of did some digging, and feel free to use the chat, or speak up if you want. This is informal. So I went out to Dell's website and I found some of the things that they have to comply with. So Sarbanes-Oxley, the CCPA, Colorado Privacy Act, interestingly enough, Connecticut, Virginia, simply because Dell does business in those states. But none of these really cover what happened here. PCI, if we're looking at standards in general, PCI DSS 4.0 actually covers API security, but this portal did not deal with credit card transactions. So PCI didn't apply, would not have applied here. But if they had a process where they perform like full software stack API security reviews, or they have an SBOM, software bill of materials, they probably could have prevented this. Something else I didn't put here is, it's also, the rate limiting. This is configuration as well. And so this goes back to my point. I really, if I had to bet money, I would say that they simply did not view this portal as a risk or as a high risk. And so they didn't really pay much attention to it. They didn't waste their time on really configuring it properly and locking it down because they didn't really think outside the box here. They didn't think through. They did no threat modeling. They didn't do anything like that. And so they reached a conclusion that was inaccurate or incorrect. Okay. Yeah, so I see, so Arturo, I was thinking the same thing, like how'd that happen? Unfortunately, when you have situations like this where you have these breaches, the victims are rarely willing to discuss details like that because it could incriminate them and open them up to maybe further liability. So like, for example, if they came out and said, oh yeah, we missed that, we should have caught it, a lawyer is going to seize on that and they can sue Dell for negligence. Hey, you just admitted that you should have known that, or you should have dealt with that. So, when it comes to, this is sort of a, so let's go on a little side quest here to use a D&D phrase. For breach notifications, victims are required to notify customers and other regulatory agencies that they've been breached, and they're supposed to notify the impact, like 49 million customer records. There's certain things that they're required to disclose, but there's a whole lot that they're not required to disclose. And I guarantee you that when that happens, when there's a breach, general counsel, they get the general counsel involved, management, CEO, and they all get involved. They have a little powwow to determine what they're legally required to disclose and what they're not. And they will absolutely not disclose anything beyond what they're required to do, and it's for that reason. It's that legal liability. They just don't want to open themselves up to further scrutiny or, like I said, liability, or further attacks. They would come out and give all the dirty details. Other hackers go, oh well, okay. I mean, so what that tells me is you have other vulnerabilities. So yeah, and that's the challenge, is we don't really know. We can only speculate. It's kind of like the SolarWinds hack, which I mentioned here. The SolarWinds hack of 2020, which I'm sure everybody's aware of, that led the U.S. government to require SBOMs from vendors that do business with them. And this, the SolarWinds thing was similar, where hackers, not similar, but hackers were able to upload some malicious code into the Orion software, which then went out, and updated all of SolarWinds customers, and that was just a huge mess. So, but yeah, that is something that, unfortunately, we don't, we're rarely going to be privy to the minutia, the in the weeds details about exactly what happened. So, so I just threw together some laws and regulations for security software, and especially APIs and API security. There really aren't that many. PCI 4.0, most of the laws and regulations that some of which are here, they deal with more PII and PHI. So let's say you have an API issue, okay, which leads to disclosure or exfiltration of PII, for example, then it's going to fall under one or more of these laws. So it's really the impact. And that's what folks need to understand is what could happen, which we'll talk about later when it comes like threat modeling. Of course, API security standards, OWASP has its own API security top 10, which is good to have and good to follow. So what are some of the challenges here? So there are several, and even some I didn't even mention here. One that I've seen, and you guys can feel free to chime in, but organizations, they're really, as I said before, this is what I led the presentation off with, is organizations, they're really motivated to do just enough to satisfy whatever law or legal agreement they've entered into. So like master services agreements, statement of work, that sort of thing, especially when you have third parties and third-party vendors, they're going to outline exactly what they will provide, what they will do, what they won't do. They'll put liability caps in the contracts, like you can only hold us liable. Our liability cannot exceed $1 million, for example, or something like that. So they'll put caps on it because there is a pressure to minimize costs and prioritize productivity. I mean, that's just a fact. That's never going to change. And so security professionals, what I've been doing, and what others, my colleagues have been doing is, we've been, now that we have all of these, these laws and regulations requiring us to do these things, it's now table stakes. In other words, instead of security and compliance being cost centers, which they used to be, they're now not profit centers, but they're business enablers. In other words, if you work for a company that's doing business for customers or clients, in many cases now you have to have like a minimum, you have to be like a minimum baseline of security. You have to be doing this minimum set, meet this minimum set of requirements just to be able to bid on that contract or do that kind of work. And so from that standpoint, you're enabling the business to turn a profit, to win more business, and stay in business. And so that we see a lot more of that today with SOC 1 and SOC 2 type SOC 1 SOC 2 reports and other reports and assessments that demonstrate that due diligence, for example, where we are doing these things. And that's actually part of my job, is where I have to review third-party service organization and controls reports from like Salesforce and some other vendors. I've done Microsoft before. I've had to review theirs, AWS, so on and so forth, to make sure that they're meeting that minimum level of security and compliance across access control and data protection and that sort of thing. So still too many BODs and leaders that just don't understand their role. They kind of get it now, that is changing and has been, but at the end of the day, these guys they're entrepreneurs, they're business people, they're accounting and finance or investors. They kind of get it, depending on where you are. But what they tend to do is, even if they do understand it, they tend to delegate it to someone lower. They'll delegate to some director somewhere and say, okay, just go do this. And they think it's just going to get done. And, it's like a fire and forget, hey, just go do this. And they don't want to hear about it anymore. And they don't even ask for status updates at the board meetings. And so that's had to change. That's having to change. And usually it's private companies that deal with that. Startups deal with that problem as well. More mature companies tend to be better about getting regular updates and being, taking more control over it. Just really depends. But there's still a lot out there that they don't fully understand that, what they're on the hook for, that they have to do these things. Too many people, IT people, who don't have a overall high level strategic view of security. And so a couple things I see is, one, like software engineers and developers and others, IT admins, they tend to be like in their own, they have this tunnel vision. They're in their own little world. They're doing their thing. And they don't really think about the wider, big picture. They don't have a big picture process. Now that does change as they move up the food chain to, like director, vice president, of course, now you're seeing it, but that should be promoted at lower levels as well, so that you understand why you're doing it. One thing I'll see sometimes is, for example, Sarbanes-Oxley only impacts, it's all about the financial statement. It's really not a security regulation at all. It's simply a law that was created in the wake of all the accounting scandals in early 2000s to force companies to take a look at what goes into their financial statements, so that investors can rely on them. So if they're reasonable assurance, they're complete and accurate. Like, that's it. Now, IT auditors do go in there and they look at things like access control and change management, things like that, because everything sits on IT, right? And so they'll look at that. But what happens is your internal IT folks will say, well, those systems they have nothing to do with the financials. So they're non-SOX. And so now you have an environment where it's SOX and non-SOX. And now what you've done, they think that they've made it easier on themselves, but they really haven't. What they've done is they've created a 2-tier system of security. And they now have to manage that. So patch management, software updates, security configurations, all those things, they're now having to manage 2 separate approaches because they just divided their network into 2 instead of just applying taking the same security approach, completely, environment wide. Non-CDE, so CDE is cardholder development. Cardholder environment, cardholder data environment. So that's like credit card transactions, same thing. And I've had to deal with that. Oh, those systems don't have anything to do with processing credit cards or storing credit cards or credit card transactions. So we don't need to do these things for those systems over there. So again, you've now created a 2-tier system. You created 2 separate environments in your network, and you have to manage both. And it's just, it's not ideal. It's not optimal. Arturo's another chance I've noticed is everything rated security team job. Yeah, that's a great point. That is a good point. Is they think, oh, that's security's job to do that, right? Yeah, I appreciate that feedback. That I can agree. I do agree that security is viewed as, they're the owners of it. And in reality, and I actually give internal training on this at my company, is I try to explain to everybody, look, security compliance is everybody's job. It's everybody's job. It's not just security. Yes, their job is like, oversight. Their job is oversight. Make sure everything's being done. Everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing. But at the end of the day, it's everyone's responsibility to recognize a phishing email when you see it and not to click on it, for example, or not execute that wire transfer to China or something like that. All that good stuff. So third-party risk, assessing third-party risk. I've had to do this before as well. This can be tricky because, third parties, again, they're approaching this from the standpoint of they need your business. And so they're going to put themselves in the most positive light that they can. And if you're the assessor, it's your job to ferret out what might be a problem. Could be a problem. One thing I used to do, I had to send out these questionnaires, these security questionnaires to our third parties, and then they would answer them and send them back. And then I would sometimes, depending on the risk level that we had assigned that vendor, I would hop on a call with the vendor to kind of go over some of the responses. And it was amazing how different, how you could have different points of view for the same question. A good example was, I remember this one. One of the questions was, do you have an intrusion detection system? And they answered yes. Well, we hop on a call and I said, okay, well, what you said you have an IDS, like what is it? And they told me what it was. I said, that's not an IDS. Like it's not even close to an IDS, but they were calling it an IDS. And so I explained why it's not, that's not an IDS. And I forget what they told me, but that's where you really, things don't really come out until you're actually talking with people like remotely, like on a Zoom call or something. So it's good, yes, no questions you can get burned by those. You really can. I had another situation where we were looking into using a vendor that one of our chief executives wanted to use them. And it was this really small outfit. Nobody had ever heard of them. And so we had some calls with them and they said, yeah, I said, do you have a WAF, a web application firewall? And they said, well, no, but we're testing one now. We're going to be rolling it out soon. And I said, okay. So our general counsel, we put in there in the contract that, vendor agrees that a web application firewall will be implemented you know, by such and such a date or whatever. We actually were a little generous with them. We gave them like an extra month or two. They came back and they struck that out. And we said, what's going on? Like, why'd you strike that out? I mean, you told us you had one, you were testing it, it was going live on this date. We even gave you extra time. And they've refused to sign any agreement that mentioned the WAF. And it turned out they had no intention of implementing the WAF. It was a bold-faced lie. And I was very upset by that and very concerned. And I told my boss, you know, I said, this is not good. You know, if they lied about this, what else are they lying about? And he agreed, but this executive wanted to use them. And so at the end of the day, you know, we ended up using them anyway. I was overridden, which that happens. And I don't like it, but I don't have to like it. I covered myself by documenting it. But things like that, my point is, it can be difficult with third parties. Some cases you have to do a site visit, look around their data center, look at their physical security, talk to people. That's when really everything comes out. The National Public Data Breach, which just came out, I'm sure you guys are aware of it, came out like a week or two ago. I mean, this was big. I think it was like the social security numbers of like pretty much every American or something like that. So NPD, in case you're wondering, these are the guys that they store background check information. And yeah, so they got busted. They got breached. So that's an example of a third party. And there are lots of examples of third parties. Intentional bypass of controls like change control. This happens as well. If there's a rush to get something out the door, a boss, you know, a supervisor, a director, you know, someone can. So a couple things. One, they can go in and say, hey, look, approve this and just approve it. Don't test it. Don't worry about it. We got to get this out. So they can skip one or more key processes in the change control or project management process to make up for lost time. And so that's one thing that could happen. Another thing that could happen is just inappropriate access within change control. For example, if you have someone who's a developer but also has access to production, you know, they could theoretically, like they have admin rights everywhere, they can theoretically promote code or move something in to a production system and no one would know, and no one, you know, without approval, that sort of thing, no logs, you know, you don't have logging turned on, nobody knows. So things like that. And poor understanding of the true risks of specific vulnerabilities. This is more what I was talking about with the Dell case. They didn't really understand fully the risk associated with that particular portal. If they had gone through like maybe proper threat modeling, talking to stakeholders, key stakeholders, that sort of thing, maybe that could have been avoided. They could have gotten a better feel. Any other comments before we move on? Nope. Okay. We're getting through there. So what are some solutions? Well, there are a lot. You know, one is have a proper understanding of GRC. Most people focus on the risk and compliance part because it's easy. Everybody understands risk for the most part. Everybody kind of understands compliance, again, for the most part, check the boxes, right? But governance is one of those things it's nebulous, it's broad, it's a broad term, covers a lot of things. And so you get a lot of different definitions of it. And rather than give you, I mean, you guys can Google the definition of governance. It's just really long, complicated definition. You know, it's like all the what processes and approaches and frameworks and systems and blah, blah, blah that go into an organization's oversight, you know, of its environment, something like that. I mean, it's just a really long thing, but really, you know, to give you a better example or to help you understand it better, I have a good example. About 5 years ago, I was working in an environment where we were PCI DSS compliant, had to be, and because we were processing credit cards, lots of them, and so IT was instructed, okay, here's PCI DSS, here's what we have to do. We're going to be audited against this because PCI requires quarterly vulnerability scans, internal and external, and all this stuff. So They did a scan. It was really bad. A lot of vulnerabilities, a lot of unpatched systems, a lot of OS is out of date and applications out of date, and just all sorts of negative things. So they went and they fixed most of it, and they thought, okay, this is great. So then came back, 3 months later, did another scan, and it was right back where it was. Like, it was really bad. And the IT director was just livid. And he came to me, he said, hey, what's going on? He said, well, I don't, and I had just hired on. And I replaced somebody who had left. And so so this is instructive. So he brought in the managing director for like a competing consulting firm and asked him. And this guy he already had people in there. He was making a ton of money off my company. And so he starts launching into this, pitch to fix the problem by, well, I can create some dashboards. We can create a whole system to monitor your systems, and we'll create these dashboards that everybody can see, where they can look at all the systems and look at the patch levels and measure them and all this fancy stuff, which is going to cost a lot of money. So then he asked me. He said, Mark, what do you think about? And so I said, you don't have a technology problem. This is not a technology issue. The issue is one of governance, meaning that when these guys fixed everything the first time, they thought they were done. And there was no one to tell them, hey, this is a quarterly thing. You're going to be held accountable for this going forward. Every quarter, you're going to have to do this. We're going to be scanned, and you're responsible. You managers are responsible for keeping up with the patches and configurations and all that stuff. No one did that. I said, these guys, no one's holding them accountable. No one's telling them they need to keep doing it. This is not a one-time thing. So they just went back to business as usual. And this is what you get. You get a scan that shows everything's awful again. And I said, here's how you fix it. You have an all-hands meeting with IT, and you get in there and you tell them that from now on, when we have these meetings, you want each manager to give you a status update on their patches, on the state of their systems that they're responsible for. The Linux, the Windows, databases. You want to see a status from each of them on patch levels every single meeting. And they're going to be held accountable, and it's going to be on the performance review. They're all responsible for doing this going forward. So that's what you need to do. And once they realize they're on the hook for this going forward, you'll see some improvement. And that's exactly what happened. They laid down the law with them, and every meeting, it was every couple of weeks, they had to provide a status, on a patch level status on Oracle databases and the Linux systems. I mean, all these things, because they were now on the hook and they knew it. And our scan results started improving dramatically. So that was a governance issue. We didn't have dashboards. It was, people were not told, management was not telling the IT staff and managers, hey, you're on the hook for this. You need to keep doing it. This is what you need to do. You need to keep doing it. And we need to see regular updates. Okay, so that's a great example of a governance issue as opposed to something where we need to throw technology at it. Think strategically, avoid the silo mentality, and try to understand how it all works together. Software bill of materials, which is great for just understanding what all APIs you have, what all objects, what everything you have. It improves security, make sure everything's up to date, that sort of thing. I don't know if you've heard of a web application and API protection. It's like the next generation WAF. Gartner, some couple guys at Gartner coined this phrase WAP. And so now the vendors have picked up on it, like Fortinet and Imperva and F5. They all have WAP solutions, of course, for protecting internet-facing APIs. I haven't used one yet. I've used WAFs, but I've never used a WAP. So, this may be the way to go. Being familiar with attack methodologies, like MITRE ATT&CK, NIST has one. Understanding how threat actors perform their attacks step by step. and from reconnaissance all the way to exploitation and weaponization and all that. The OWASP top 10 is, again, that's a great source, as well as a CWE top 25. It's a similar deal. Understanding the likelihood and impact based on your situation environment. So in other words, and I just had this conversation last week with somebody. You have all your red, yellow, blue, or red, yellow, green, orange, heat maps showing likelihood and impact, and you're supposed to generate like a risk score out of that, which that's fine. The problem is that it could vary based on your environment. So it's important to understand what controls your environment has in place. So work with your security team, work with stakeholders, work with everybody to figure out, okay, normally this is a very high problem, but here, I mean, is it still, or is this something that we can bump down a little bit, right? Okay, so Arturo, what's the best approach to champion governance apart from executive sponsorships for? Okay, so top-down approach, you're right. Yeah, who should lead and incorporate these governance programs to align with the company's business? Yeah, that's a good question. Normally, there's going to be someone like myself, someone who's at director level at least, who's been given the authority, by management to run with that. Typically, it's a CISO that does that, a chief information security officer or a CISO type of person. And CISOs are usually directors or senior directors. I've been a CISO 2 or 3 times, and that's what those guys do. Is they do exactly what you're saying here. Is their job is to take those governance programs, make sure that they align with the business, align it with the business. So in other words, aligning IT security with the business so that IT security can do their jobs the best they can and enable the business to go out there and employ new technologies and leverage new technologies and get into new markets and so on and so forth. So usually it's a CISO or a CISO type person. They'll do that. In most cases, it's a single person. It can be 2 though. You can have like a compliance guy and a security guy, both working together. I've always done it. I've always done all of it myself. It just depends. But that's usually the person that does it. Yeah. Yeah, but you're right. It does need to have a top-down approach. And then working with key stakeholders to understand the risk. Let's go back to the Dell situation. If Dell had sat down with key stakeholders about this customer portal, instead of relying on their own, again, I'm speculating, but they probably thought, oh, this is a customer portal, who cares? I've learned, you sit down with the customer and say, okay, this is your portal. What's it being used for? Understand, I love flowcharts for this reason. Let's flowchart this out. What does it mean? What's the purpose of this portal? What data is it going to store? Are there any transactions that are going to take place? Is there any, how are customers going to use this? How are vendors going to use it? And again, the key thing, what information is this going to store? Okay. Is this going to be a problem? Is there a risk there? What if it gets out? All of these, you have to walking through the risk and analyzing the risk and getting an understanding of the risk and the potential impact, and then what that could mean for the company. So lastly, this is just an example. We have these risks on the left, SQL injection, broken authentication, XSS, all this. You'll have an attack vector, so exploitability, and then you have your prevalence. Is it easy to detect? The impact, and then what the business impacts are. Business impact is key, so it's going to be like, PII being disclosure of PII or PHI or CHI, cardholder information, whatever it is. That's usually going to be that, but it could be something else. It could be you could take a threat actor could actually take over the application or take over the host, gain control of the host, or attacker could upload his own code and pollute, our own code, maybe put something that's malicious that could be distributed like the SolarWinds hack. Okay, so understanding the business impact is key, but also these red, orange, yellow, review those and make sure that they're true for your organization. Now, one thing that I do need to mention, I worked for a service provider a few years back, and our company, our customers were all the big banks like Wells Fargo, Chase, JP Morgan, and Bank of America was a big one. And we ended up, we had done a scan of our main web portal, and it was awful. It was really bad. And they came back and they said, okay, well, here's they did all this for us. They did their risk ranking. They had their own risk ranking. And they said, here's our risk ranking, and now it's yours. In other words, we were forced to agree to their risk ranking. We were not allowed to say, you know what, we really don't think it's that high. It didn't matter. We think it's really high, so it's really high. And if you want to keep doing business with us, you'll treat it as very high. And what they did was they took all of the default ratings that you get from the scanning tool and from OWASP and whatever, and they bumped them up. They just automatically bumped them up by one. So a medium turned into a high turned into a very high turned into a critical. Just automatic. It was just automatic. They said, this is what we automatically do because they're so risk averse that they automatically bumped everything up one. Just because they're very risk averse and they wanted to take it seriously. And so we were forced to adhere to that. And that was an issue for us because depending on the severity, that is the severity is what determined how long our developers had to fix those things. And so normally like a medium we give ourselves 3 months to fix. Well, they bumped a medium up to a high. And so that made it a month, I think. And then like very high and critical, that's a week. And so there are some things that got bumped up to where normally we normally takes our developers a month to fix it. Well, now we're being forced to fix it in a week because BOA just bumped it up. And so that's something that can happen out in the real world if you're a service provider and your customers are very high risk environments like banks and financial institutions. So that's just a gotcha there. Lastly, threat modeling. This is always good. Understand, I mentioned this before, going through and figuring out, okay, what are the attack vectors? What could a threat actor do? And then let's say a threat actor is able to do it. Then what? And trace it through. And this can be fairly complicated, but what you'll see is you'll start seeing the same thing. Okay, we're missing a control here, or we have a crypto weakness. With our cryptographic module is weak. We need to fix that. Or we have a function here that's could be exploited, assuming they get that far. And then you'll say, okay, well, let's say they did all of these things. What's the impact, right? And so threat modeling is always helpful. You may have to hire external consultants to do that if you don't know how to do it yourselves. But this is a good way to, identify issues. So, okay. So with that, turn it over to you guys. You guys have any questions based on everything that we went through? You can type them in the chat or you can come off of mute and ask.
Just quickly curious about that risk analysis and that threat model. Is that kind of like a good approach to do those in that type of order? Or I've seen maybe sometimes they swap it. I've seen threat model almost always ideally happen before. But is there like a best practice roadmap?
Yeah, so I only put those in that order. I didn't put them in any order. That's just completely random. The fact that I put threat modeling after risk analysis, that was just random. And I may, maybe after this session, I'll reverse them since you brought that up. Yeah, I didn't mean anything by putting one after the other. I just threw them up there. But you're right. Threat modeling typically comes prior to risk analysis. And yes, to answer your question, if you look at like there's a lot of guidance out there, and it's all pretty much the same. If you look at like the CISSP training materials, CISM training materials, they both say pretty much the same thing. They'll have and they actually test you on it. That whole process, that risk analysis process, where you go through and you identify the threats and your threat modeling, and then come out with your final analysis. So you are correct that that heat map is really like the final thing. That's like the final deliverable, if you will, or the final result after you've looked at everything. Should be that, and then that's what you make your decisions off of. But yeah, there are, to answer your question, yes, there are defined what do you call it, best practice approaches for that.
Got it, got it. And maybe not to get too deep into threat modeling, but how to best determine the scope of your threat model? Because I know sometimes you can get so deep into even each individual process, and when you're talking about a large scale application, that can get out of hand really quick.
Can.
So how do you guys make that determination on the scope?
Yeah, so I think it's going to be, and I've done those big apps before. Back in the day, we used HP Fortify to do like code scans and things like that. And I think some of our bigger apps we just outsourced to a third party and had them do it. But you're right, there's some big apps out there that could, potentially be an issue. And I think what I would do and what I've done in the past is, take take the 50,000 foot approach, start there. And say, okay, what is this app? What is its purpose? What it's supposed to do? That information should be evident from the project management team, and then start looking at the components and understand, all right, what is this? What's the app supposed to do? Where's the data stored? And then, in terms of your, how do you zoom in? As you take that 50,000 foot approach and then start zooming in, you're going to find that certain things are going to come out of that. One of those things is, okay, I see where data is being stored. So start zooming in on where data is being entered, where it's being stored. So storage of data, what kind of data? What are we storing? Oh, we're storing PII. Okay, well, what does that mean? That's a wide definition. Name, address, phone number, things like that. You have PII. Is it health information? Is it banking information? Bank account number and routing number, for example. Okay, what are we storing? Where is it being stored? And then you can backtrack out to find out what's controlling that. Focus on that stuff. If it's credit card transactions or any kind of financial transactions, maybe it's inventory even, identify the functions that are driving that and focus in on that. So that's what I would do is, it's a top-down approach, but you can also come at it from, all right, let's start with what data we're dealing with and then zoom out. And that let the let the at-risk information drive it. Does that make sense?
No, that makes sense. I like that.
Yeah.
Almost like not an inside out, but an outside in analysis.
Yeah, and both work, and you can do both. I mean, you don't have to do one and not the other. You can do them both. I used to do both. I used to want to know, all right, 50,000 foot level, and then let's drill down. And then I would write down questions and start asking questions. And then I would say, okay, what data are we storing or transmitting? Okay, or what transactions are we performing? Where is that happening? And then identify those components. Okay, well, it's going to sit in this database. Okay, what's talking to that database? Oh, well, we have this API. Okay, let's look at that API. And then start zooming out. See what I'm saying?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And don't forget things like scripts and service accounts and your APIs and things like that. Anything that's doing communicating, you want to give a lot of scrutiny to, because that's what's being exploited these days. It's vulnerable APIs, but it's also, if you look at it, it's like with this national public data thing. They're usually a combination of API vulnerabilities or software vulnerabilities and stolen credentials. They're all, and in that case, in the MPD breach, they came out and said they had some stolen credentials that they had somehow obtained, and so they're using a combination of the two. And so anything dealing with authentication and authorization, you want to take a look at, especially if it's automated. So now that's why I say anything that's automated, look at the API, the script, the service account, whatever is doing that authentication and pushing that data or pulling that data. So yeah, anything else? Okay, so I think we're at time. Hope you guys got some good information out of it. I know we're a couple minutes over, but yeah, again, appreciate the opportunity to present to you all, and I guess have a great day.
Thanks for your time. Very valuable.
Yeah,
Enjoyed it
no
a lot.
problem.
Thanks.
All right.
Bye-bye.